2,500 years ago, a Greek traveler stands in the sand of Egypt and looks up at a building so vast that he can barely breathe. He has already seen the pyramids of Giza. He has already called them the greatest thing human hands ever made. And now he writes something almost no one dares to write. He writes that this building is greater. Then that building disappears, not falls, not crumbles slowly into the river. Disappears. 3,000 rooms, 12 courts, a structure the size of a small city. And today, if you fly over the exact spot where it stood, you see almost nothing at all. A field, some mud, a broken hill. So here is the question that has haunted archaeology for 2,000 years. How do you lose the biggest building in the ancient world? Stay with me. Because somewhere under that field, there may be a chamber that no living human has ever entered. A door the Egyptians themselves refused to open. We will come back to that door, I promise you. But first, you need to stand where the traveler stood. You are in the Fayum. It is a strange green pocket of Egypt, an hour or so south of where Cairo will one day rise. The desert is all around you, dry and pale and endless. But here, fed by a branch of the Nile, there is water. There is a great shining lake the Greeks call Moeris. There are reeds and birds and fish and crocodiles sunning themselves on the mud, and on the edge of this lake stands a monument that makes grown men go quiet. The year is around 1850 before our era. The man who built this place is already dead, but his power still fills the air. His name is Amenemhat, the third king to carry that name. He is a Per-AA, a great house, what you would call a pharaoh. And he is the last truly mighty ruler of a golden age Egyptians will remember as the Middle Kingdom. Look at what he leaves behind. Beside the lake rises his pyramid. It is not white stone like Giza. It is built of dark mud brick, then wrapped in gleaming limestone, so that from far away it shines. It stands about 58 meters tall. Each side of its base runs about 100 meters, and it hides a trick we will return to later, because Amenemhat is a king who does not trust anyone, not even the dead. But the pyramid is not why the traveler came. The pyramid is not the wonder. Just south of it spreads something with no name in any language he knows. A single wall wraps around a complex so large it swallows the horizon. Inside that wall are courts open to the sky, roofed halls, colonnades, passages that turn and turn again and open into rooms, and those rooms open into more rooms, on, until your sense of direction simply gives up. The Egyptians call it Ankh-Amenhot, the life of Amenemhat. The Greeks will give it a different name, a name that will echo for centuries. They will call it the Labyrinth. Here's what most people miss. When you hear that word, you think of Crete. You think of the Minotaur, the bull in the maze, King Minos. But that Greek myth came later. And according to the Romans, the Cretan maze was a copy, a small copy, of this. So who was the man standing in the sand? And what exactly did he see? His name is Herodotus. He is a Greek writer from a city on the coast of what is now Turkey, and he travels the known world asking questions, writing everything down. Later ages will call him the father of history. He is careful, he is curious, and he is honest in a way that matters for our story because he tells you plainly what he saw with his own eyes and what he only heard. He visits Egypt around 450 before our era. By the time he arrives, the labyrinth is already ancient. Amenemhat has been dead for more than 1,000 years. Think about that for a moment. To Herodotus, this building is as old as the fall of the Roman Empire is to you, and it is still standing, still roofed, still guarded. He walks inside. And in the second book of his histories, he writes words that have never lost their strange power. He says the pyramids are beyond description, each one equal to many great works of the Greeks. And then he says the labyrinth surpasses even the pyramids. Read that again. The most famous buildings on earth, and he ranks this higher. He counts as he walks. 12 great courts, all covered, with gateways facing one another, 6 opening to the north and 6 opening to the south, all held inside one outer wall. And chambers, so many chambers, 3,000 of them, 1,500 above the ground, 1,500 below. He tells you he walked the upper rooms himself. He passed through the winding halls, past walls carved with figures, under roofs made of single slabs of stone. He says no words can do it justice, but then his voice drops. He tells you there was one place they would not let him go, the lower chambers, the 1,500 rooms beneath the earth. When Herodotus asks to see them, the Egyptian keepers refuse. Absolutely refuse, and they give him a reason that raises the hair on your arms. Down there, they say, are the tombs of the kings who first built this place, and down there are the sacred crocodiles. Hold that thought, because that refusal is the door I promised you. 1,500 rooms that even Herodotus, standing right there, was not allowed to enter. He wrote about them anyway, from what he was told, and no one since has proven him wrong. So the mystery is not only where the labyrinth went, the mystery is what it was hiding. Now you might be thinking, this is one Greek tourist with a good imagination. Maybe he exaggerated. Travelers do. That is a fair thought. Let me show you why it does not hold, because Herodotus is not alone. Roughly 400 years later, another man comes to the Fayum. His name is Strabo, a Greek geographer who works under the power of Rome, and he is not an easy man to impress. He measures, he compares, he writes a geography of the whole world, and Strabo stands where Herodotus stood, and he too is stunned. He describes a monument with as many great halls as there are provinces in Egypt. He says the passages twist so badly that no stranger could ever find the way in or out without a guide walking beside him. He describes roofs of solid stone, each one a single enormous block, laid across halls of astonishing size. And he adds something Herodotus did not. He tells you what the place was for. Strabo says the 12 courts were meeting halls, that once a year the leaders of Egypt's provinces came here, each nome to its own court, with their priests and priestesses. They gathered to make sacrifices to the gods. They gathered to judge the greatest matters of the land. It was, in his account, the beating administrative heart of a kingdom, a parliament built of stone. And near the lake, he says, lived a crocodile, a tame one. Its name was Suchus, which is the Greek voice for Sobek, the crocodile god. Visitors would come and feed it bread and meat and honey and wine by hand, this living animal that carried a god inside it. 2 men, 4 centuries apart. The same impossible building, but it gets stranger because they are still not the only witnesses. An Egyptian priest named Manetho writes of it, though he calls it simply a tomb. Diodorus Siculus, another Greek historian, writes of its vastness and its link to sacred rites, and a Roman named Pliny the Elder writes the boldest claim of all. He says the man who built the famous maze of Crete studied this Egyptian labyrinth first and copied only 1/100th of it. 1/100th. If all these men were lying, they were lying in perfect agreement across 500 years in different languages, having never met. So the evidence pointed one way. Something real once stood in the sand at Hawara, something enormous. And then the world simply lost it. For over 1,000 years, no one could say for certain where it had been. The labyrinth slipped out of the map and into legend. It became a place people argued about in books, drawing wild pictures of a maze they had never seen. In the 17th century, a German scholar named Athanasius Kircher even printed a grand engraving of it, a perfect ring of 12 courts around a central maze, entirely from imagination. The labyrinth had become a ghost story with footnotes, and ghosts, as you know, are hard to dig up. Now watch what happens next, because this is where the story turns from legend into dirt and sweat and stone. In the year 1843, a German expedition arrives in the Fayum, led by a sharp-eyed scholar named Carl Richard Lepsius. He studies the ground, he studies the old accounts, and he points at a low, ruined mound of brick beside the Pyramid of Hawara and says, in effect, this is it. This is the place Herodotus described. For the first time in more than 1,000 years, the labyrinth has an address again, but pointing at a spot is not the same as proving what is under it. For that, you need a very particular kind of person, stubborn, careful, a little bit crazy. And in the year 1888, that person shows up. His name is Flinders Petrie. You should remember him, because in many ways he invents the whole idea of doing archaeology properly. Before Petrie, men dug for treasure and smashed everything else. Petrie records every layer, every fragment, every scrap of pottery. He treats the ground like a book to be read line by line instead of a chest to be looted. And Petrie comes to Hawara to find the labyrinth. Picture him there, the Egyptian sun hammering down, his workers moving the sand basket by basket, and slowly, south of the pyramid, the truth of the place emerges from the ground. It is a heartbreak. Where Herodotus, saw 3,000 rooms, Petrie finds an enormous flat foundation of packed sand and stone chips. He describes it famously as a great bed of chips. The soaring halls are gone, the roofs of single stone slabs are gone, the colonnades are gone. What remains is the floor of something that was once titanic, ground down to almost nothing. Because here is the cruel truth of Egyptian ruins. For 2,000 years, people used them as quarries. Why cut fresh stone from a hillside when a whole abandoned wonder sits in the desert, ready to be carried away? Block by block, wall by wall, the labyrinth was hauled off to build other towns, other temples, other houses whose names we will never know. The greatest building in Egypt did not fall in an earthquake. It was slowly, patiently eaten by the living. But Petrie did not walk away with nothing. Pay attention to this, because the fragments he pulled from that ground are the closest you will ever get to touching the labyrinth with your own hands. He found statues, broken but readable. Fragments of white limestone showing the goddess Hathor. Fragments showing Sobek, the crocodile god, exactly as the old writers said. Fragments of Amenemhat III himself, standing between two goddesses who hold fish in their hands, offerings from the water. Each of these shattered figures once stood in its own shrine, many shrines, just as Strabo described his many halls. And to the north and east of the pyramid, Petrie found something colder, a cemetery, shaft tombs, and a zone he named in plain words the area of crocodile burials, sacred crocodiles, buried in the ground, at the exact spot where Herodotus said sacred crocodiles were kept below the earth. The tourist was telling the truth. So now you know the labyrinth was real. You know roughly where it stood. You know it was stripped for stone until almost nothing was left on the surface. But remember the door. Remember the 1,500 rooms underground that even Herodotus was forbidden to see. Petrie found the floor of the upper world. He never found that lower one. And that is where our story stops being history and starts being a live mystery, one that is still argued about today. In the year 2008, a joint team of Belgian and Egyptian researchers came back to Hawara with tools Petrie could only have dreamed of. They called themselves the Madaha Expedition, and instead of digging, they scanned, ground-penetrating radar, geophysical survey, machines that send signals into the earth and listen to what bounces back, drawing a picture of what lies below without moving a single grain of sand. They pointed those machines at the ground south of the pyramid, and they reported something remarkable. Patterns beneath the surface, regular shapes, straight lines and hard edges of a kind that nature does not usually make. They interpreted the readings as the remains of a vast structure, still down there, still buried, in the very place the old writers pointed to. Now, I have to be honest with you, and this is the part the internet often skips. Those results are debated. The full findings were never completely published and confirmed in the way careful science demands. Many Egyptologists remain cautious. Radar can be tricked by natural rock layers, by old water channels, by wishful eyes. And there is a very real physical problem in the way. The whole area sits below the water table now. The entrance to Amenemhat's pyramid is flooded to a depth of about 6 meters, drowned by water from a canal cut nearby. Anything underground here is likely underwater, buried in mud, crushed by time. So no one has opened the door. Nobody has walked those 1,500 lower rooms, if they still exist. Nobody has stood among the sacred crocodiles and the tombs of forgotten kings. The one place Herodotus was refused, we are still refused 25 centuries later, not by priests now, by water and mud, and the simple, stubborn fact that the greatest building in the ancient world was quarried into dust before anyone could save it. The labyrinth kept its deepest secret. It always did. Step back with me now and look at the whole shape of this story, because there is a lesson buried in it deeper than any chamber. Think about what Amenemhat III was trying to do. He was a king at the end of a golden age. He had already built one pyramid to the north at a place called Dashur, the one people now call the Black Pyramid. But its foundations were unstable, sinking into soft ground, so he built again here at Hawara. And this time he was taking no chances, not in life and not in death. Inside his pyramid, he hid his burial chamber like a puzzle box, a chamber carved from a single gigantic block of hard stone, a ceiling lowered into place to seal it, passages that led nowhere, trapdoors of stone, dead ends built on purpose to defeat any robber who ever broke inside. He wanted, more than anything, to lie undisturbed forever. And around that pyramid, he raised the labyrinth, a monument so complex that a stranger could not cross it alone, a building meant to hold his name, his gods, and the memory of his kingdom for all time. He was doing what every pharaoh did. He was fighting death. This is the oldest dream in Egypt: to survive, to be remembered, to carve your name so deep in stone that time itself cannot rub it out. The Egyptians believed a person had a ka, a life force, and that force needed the name and the monument to endure. Forget a man's name, and you truly kill him. So they built in stone forever against forgetting. And here is the terrible irony that should sit with you. Amenemhat built the most unforgettable building on the planet, a wonder that outranked the pyramids, a structure that stunned the sharpest minds of Greece and Rome. He spent a kingdom's wealth to be remembered, and it is the one great monument of Egypt we can no longer find. The pyramids of Giza still stand plain and simple 4,500 years on. But the labyrinth, the clever one, the vast one, the one built to defeat forgetting, was carried off in pieces by people who needed a few bricks for a wall. His burial chamber, that perfect puzzle box, was robbed anyway, emptied in antiquity. The king who planned every trapdoor to keep robbers out did not keep them out. That is the collapse at the center of this story. Not a war, not a flood, just time and human hands, quietly taking a wonder apart until only a bed of chips remained. So what do you carry away from the sand at Hawara? Take 3 things with you. The first is a simple historical truth. The labyrinth was real. For centuries, scholars wondered if Herodotus made it up. He did not. Lepsius found the place. Petrie found the floor, the shrines, the shattered gods, the buried crocodiles, exactly where the old accounts said they would be. When an honest witness tells you something impossible, it is worth checking before you call him a liar. The tourist was right, and the experts who doubted him were wrong. The second is a human lesson about power. Amenemhat III was one of the mightiest kings Egypt ever produced, and he poured that might into stone, trying to freeze his own memory in place forever. But no wall is stronger than 1,000 ordinary people who each need a single brick. Empires do not always fall to armies. Sometimes they are simply borrowed away quietly by the very people who come after. And the third is the emotional one, the one that stays with you on the drive home. Everything you build to be remembered by can be taken apart. The labyrinth was designed to be the ultimate monument against forgetting, and it became the greatest example of forgetting we have. And yet, here you are, 25 centuries later, thinking about Amenemhat III, speaking his name, which means the stones failed, but the story did not. In the end, it was not the wall or the maze or the puzzle box that carried him to you, it was words. A curious Greek, writing down what he saw because he could not believe it. Maybe that is the real lesson of Hawara. We think we survive through what we build, but we survive through what we tell. Somewhere under that quiet green field in the Fayum, below the mud and the water, there may still be 1,500 rooms no living eye has ever seen. Tombs of kings, sacred crocodiles. A door the Egyptians closed 2,500 years ago and no one has opened since. Maybe one day, someone will. Maybe it is better that no one has. So let me leave you with this. If the lower chambers of the labyrinth were open tomorrow, and you could walk down into that darkness where even Herodotus was forbidden to go, would you want to see what is waiting inside? Or some doors, are they meant to stay closed? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone.